Hey, May 40 here. So Nietzsche has a great saying that I think is the best saying for this topic, all right, decoding work. And Nietzsche said, when you have a why, right, you can do almost anything. If you have a reason to do something that's strong enough, you can pretty much do anything that's within the realm of possibility for you. So I have friends who have 3 kids, 4 kids, 5 kids, 6 kids, 8 kids, 10 kids, 12 kids, right? And just providing for 12 kids, that's all the why that the parents need to get up every morning, right? If you've got kids to support, send them to a Jewish day school, which is going to cost you anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 a year. You want to build a legacy, all right, through your children, all right? That's the why, and that'll keep you going. Some mornings, all right, I'm not married, I don't have kids, but some mornings I'll get up at 2 a.m. and I will write for 4 hours, and then I'll work for 8 hours, and then I will come back here and live stream for another hour. Right? I am passionate about what I do. I think that I have, in some areas, I have clarity. I think I bring something to the table that you don't easily get elsewhere. I think that my show is superior to almost all other right-wing commentary. And so that fills me with a why. And so I can get up early in the morning and start writing and getting more clarity and work and pay my bills and save some money for retirement, read books, right, research academic articles, and then come back and talk to you about them because I'm filled with passion. So whether you're passionate about politics or culture or traveling overseas, you're passionate about your community, your religion, your friendships, your hobbies, all right, your favorite sports, whether you're passionate about learning. How am I doing? Can you tell me a bit about myself? Yeah, I am from Australia. I have been blogging since July 3, 1997. I started live streaming almost every day in January of 2018. So I just have a niche audience, but you'll get insights here that you're not going to get anywhere else, right? You'll get some rules for life. You'll get some principles for decoding reality that you're not going to get elsewhere, because pretty much every successful live streamer is predictable, right? You come to them and they give you what you expect. So if they're on the left, they'll give you the reasons why the left is just totally awesome. And if you're right, right wing, all right, you'll find that some right wing live streamer tells you you're totally awesome, and they'll hand out the hate porn, right? They'll ramp up the outrage, and they'll tell you, this is the problem, right? This is why you are struggling in life. These are the people who are holding you down, all right? It's the elites, or it's the capitalists, or it's the commies, right? But I don't have those kind of easy answers. How am I doing? I like that you were here already talking when I joined in. Am I yapping? Yes, I'm yapping, all right? I want to talk about the nature of work, and I have a long, lurid history with work, right? I'm best known for 10 years, 12 years, I wrote about the pornography industry. So that's why I arrived on 60 Minutes. That's why I was interviewed on Entertainment Tonight. That's why I was profiled in the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times and most major media news organizations in the United States, because I broke a lot of stories about people who were transmitting deadly diseases such as HIV. And one of my interests, I love reading. So probably the number one topic is related to philosophy. I particularly like the philosophy of the social sciences as embodied by Stephen Turner. I like trying to understand the phrases and the ideas that dominate popular discourse that are just bunk. So, for example, one idea that just dominates popular discourse is that democracy is the most beautiful expression of communal feeling, when in reality, I don't know about your life, but in my life, democracy has very little to do with it. All right? The world runs on hierarchy, and yet all the elite discourse, all the mainstream media discourse is about how wonderful democracy is. But I'm glad that we get to have elections every 2 years or every 4 years here in the United States. But overwhelmingly, life still runs on hierarchy. All those rights that you think you have, God-given rights of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to practice your religion, all right, freedom to go to work and earn a living, they can all get taken away just like that in the name of emergency. So you think, dictatorship, democracy, these are opposites. They're not opposites. All dictatorships contain considerable elements of democracy, right? There were things that Adolf Hitler wanted to do and he could not get done because of popular resentment. For example, Jews in Germany who were married to Germans, right? To the best of my knowledge, most of them survived World War II because of the opposition of their non-Jewish spouses, right? They did not permit the rounding up of their Jewish spouses. Joseph Stalin, all right? Dictator number one, all right? During World War II, he wanted to get the people on his side. So he reopened churches. He reopened all sorts of freedoms that he'd previously taken away so that he could get people on his side. Nikita Khrushchev, all right? Dictator, leader of the Soviet Union, right? He was peacefully removed from power and he went off into retirement because the rest of the Politburo did not like the way he conducted the Cuban Missile Crisis, as opposed to, say, the democracies like the United States. Well, in the United States, the chief executive, the president of the United States, has all the foreign policy powers of King George III in the 18th century, right? No significant difference, right? The president of the United States can essentially go outside of the United States and kill anybody, right? And no one's effectively going to stop him, right? He can drop nuclear bombs. He can launch troops. He can launch drone strikes, all right? Barack Obama, the drone warrior, killed thousands of people. And there are essentially no restrictions on what a president of the United States can do with regard to foreign policy, at least initially. Okay, gay people transmit STDs the most. Well, not gay people. Homosexual men seem to transmit a disproportionate number of STDs, and yet our elites overwhelmingly and our media overwhelmingly thought that it just wasn't on to ask gay men during the monkeypox outbreak that those gay men who are participating in orgies maybe should tone that down during the massive monkeypox outbreak. But there was very little talk from public health authorities, and it was not the dominant media narrative regarding the monkeypox outbreak because we have groups that are essentially regarded as sacred by the dominant liberal left elite who control and run almost all of our institutions. So you cannot make group-wide criticisms of Jews, of gays, of transsexuals, of blacks, right? There are all these sacred minorities who are regarded as exempt from criticism. So many right-wing commentators have gotten into trouble because they cannot give a pithy answer of what is woke. But one great answer to what is woke is, say, to admit that from a woke perspective, there are many sacred groups who are exempt from criticism. All right, chiefly Jews, gays, transsexuals, African Americans, blacks. Right, these groups should not be subjected to any group-wide criticism. So my difficult topic when we don't have a lot of problems in Finland except the problems caused by immigration. So yeah, why does Finland have far more immigration than its citizens want? Because much of the world, including most of the first world, is not run on democratic principles nearly as much as on hierarchical principles. So you have a tiny number of people who essentially decide how many immigrants your country is going to accept, whether they come legally or illegally. So the general opinion of the people doesn't really have much to do with it, all right? Immigration is decided by an elite. So as a reaction to the 30-year war in Germany in the 17th century, we've had more and more of the most dramatic and rupturing parts of life removed from the realm of the political and instead turned over to the realm of the experts. And so a tiny number of experts essentially decide how many immigrants first world countries get to have. And the major political parties, the polite political parties of the center right, the center left, right, the acceptable alternatives, all right, they have governed and they have run for political office through a mutual agreement to remove immigration from the topics that they're going to fight over because it's thought just too inflammatory. So after World War II, nationalism got a dirty name. More and more of life was removed from the realm of the political. We got more and more ruled by experts, and we had a neutralization of vital political problems such as immigration. Now there's only one sector of politics that is consistently addressing the overwhelming numbers of immigrants into Europe, right? The numbers that came in 2022 were double, over 5 million compared to 2021. and only one sector of the political spectrum is willing to address this, and that is the far right, the scary far right, the Nazis, the fascists, the racists, the Islamophobes, all those awful, awful people. Well, they're the only ones who are willing to meet the needs of the people, right? So if only the far right or the far left are willing to meet the most pressing needs of the people, then politics is going to shift away from the polite alternatives, from the media-appointed alternatives, from the elite alternatives, and instead you'll get the rise of a different elite, right? Elites are not around forever, right? They will be replaced when they don't do their job effectively. So elites can operate ineffectually and destructively for a number of years, but eventually there will be a revolt and there will be a replacement of the elites with a new elite. So under 200 people choose for over 5.5 million, says this chatter from Finland. And the two biggest parties make the choice, and those two parties are essentially friends with each other, and they have tacitly agreed to keep many of the most hot-button issues off the table. All right, number one topic for today comes from a New Yorker article. Work sucks. What could salvage it? New books examine the place of work in our lives and how people throughout history have tried to change it. And the author who gets the most love from this New Yorker piece is Elizabeth Anderson. You all know her as the John Dewey Distinguished University Professor of Philosophy and Women's Studies at the University of Michigan.
It was a huge pleasure to be back in London with the opportunity to address you about my latest work, which is all about the work ethic. Here I'm going to be focusing in my data on the American work ethic. Of course, Americans inherited the work ethic from the English, who were the great inventors, so I will be going back to the origins of the work ethic in 17th century England.
So guess what? Effectiveness at work and a healthy attitude to work, like everything else, like a healthy attitude to sex, to religion, to hobbies, to how you spend your fair time, depends on the quality of your relationships, right? If you have a family and you like your family, if you have extended family and you like your extended family, if you belong to a community, if you belong to a nation, if you identify with a particular tribe or people or religion, then you have a why to go to work, right? Why to push yourself, why to try to earn as much money as possible, to take care of your family, to provide, to protect, to create a reserve for difficult times, to support causes that you believe in, right? If you've got that why, then you can go out there and you can accomplish anything. And the chat is rocking over on kick.com/Luke Ford. Smartest thing would be for there to be no parties, but for everyone to come together, try to build a better country together. When there are different parties and the task is to disagree with the other party, in which case nothing gets done. Different parties equal different opinions. Well, sometimes a liberal democracy is the most efficient way to meet people's needs and to deal with the situations that come up. But sometimes a hierarchical authoritarian regime, a xenophobic police state will be more adaptive. All right, if you are fighting for your survival, whatever type of political system best suits you for survival, that's the way to go. Whichever type of politics best enhances the development and flourishing of your people, of your nation, then that's the way to go, right? Effective politics does not depend upon the beauty of its principles, right? The transcendence of its rhetoric, its adherence to this 17th century liberal philosopher or that 18th century liberal philosopher. Right? What primarily matters in politics and in life is providing for the flourishing, the protection, and the survival of your people. Right? And your people should be a particular nation or tribe, which should feel to you like an extended family. Right? When you have a family, when you have an extended family, then you have reasons to go to work. You have reasons to sacrifice. If you don't feel much in common with your fellow citizens, like where are your reasons to spend more time in social activities if you have great fear of people around you? In Los Angeles, half the residents don't speak English, right? Los Angeles is incredibly fragmented and fractured. Los Angelinos feel almost nothing in common with each other, and so you can't expect that you're going to get a whole lot of sacrifice on behalf of people who don't speak your language, who don't practice your religion, who are not a part of your tribe, who you don't feel like are a part of your nation, who you're just saddled with, and you can't talk to them, you have very little in common, you're not going to make sacrifices for those people, all right? You're not going to look forward to spending time with them, right? The more you have in common with people, right, the more willing you're going to be to sacrifice, right? The more genetically you have in common, right, the more you're going to sacrifice. So parents will routinely make sacrifices for children that no other group will. And people will make sacrifices for their aunts and their uncles and their nieces, right, for extended family, right? That's the normal thing to do. You primarily make sacrifices for your family, for your spouse, for your children, and then your extended family. And your nation, your tribe, your community, your religion should effectively be as an extended family to you. And then that will fill you with passion and purpose and excitement. And that should be everything you need to keep going in life if you're a normal person. Now, I'm a bit off the beaten track. I need my books. I need my ideas. I need dialogue with people who are smarter than me. I need to be constantly exploring new ideas. But that's for eccentrics, right? That's for people who are intellectual gigolos, such as myself, right? I fall in love with pretty new ideas on a regular basis, but I ultimately stay loyal to none.
But first, let's take a look at the work ethic American style. So these are common norms that arise in the American context. Americans think of work as central to their personal life.
So there's no longer much of an American identity because we've become so diverse, right? Diversity means we don't have much in common. So work ethic, American style, for many groups, right, they are not characterized by the work ethic. All right, I have friends who are employers who have found that one group in particular is very easy to hire and impossible to fire without getting sued. So unfortunately, some people I know will never hire members of a certain group that is not known for its work ethic because they've paid the brutal price of being sued when they gave someone an opportunity. Right, so this idea that the work ethic is just central to the American personality, it's central to the traditional American personality. It's not central to the personalities of all sorts of different groups in America who are underachieving. So on average, right, Americans of Northeast Asian heritage work harder, do better in school, make more money, save more money, have more solid families than Americans of European heritage. And then Latinos are all over the map, right? Many Latinos are of European heritage and have life results just like other Europeans. Other Latinos come from a different genetic mixture and they have their own strengths and weaknesses. African Americans dominate large swaths of American life. They come with their own strengths and weaknesses. So due to the massive amount of immigration we've had in the United States over the past 50 years, we no longer have much of an American identity. And this idea that Americans are united by a work ethic, that it builds character, they're on call at all times, and they would feel great stigma against taking social welfare, right? That's true of many Americans, all right? Maybe Christian Americans of Protestant European background. Not so true. It's also true of Americans from Northeast Asian background. Not so true for other groups.
Identity, we think it builds character. Many of us are on call at all hours. Certainly myself, I'm receiving emails and sending emails at all hours. There's a huge stigma attached to being unemployed and also to receiving free stuff from the government, any kind of welfare benefits. And there's a kind of culture of performative workaholism, showing up and showing that you're working really hard and demonstrating to other people that you're working really hard. Here you can see the United States on the far right is the only rich capitalist country in the world that has 0 days of state-mandated paid vacation, 0. Now, of course, the many workers do have paid vacation through their employment contract. About half of workers, a little more than half of workers have paid vacation days through their employment contract. However, the vast majority of workers do not take all of their contractually eligible entitlements.
Right. Americans are the only country without government socialized welfare for all. Right. Essentially, if you're a man, you will have a very hard time getting government welfare unless you manage to find a way to get disability. people lose their jobs. They got to scramble for health insurance. Thousands of Americans go broke because of medical care that they can't afford.
Untitled vacation days.
And this is not my criticism of America. It's just pointing out that we live in an incredibly fractured, comparatively low trust society compared to even Australia, England, France, Germany, let alone places like Japan and Korea. We're an incredibly competitive society in large part because of the fear of falling through the cracks or not having the money to pay for vital healthcare, right? So we work harder. We're more productive than almost all other countries. We're more creative. We're more influential, right? We lead the world. One reason I say in Los Angeles is there are just so many exciting people to meet. I run into billionaires. I run into poets, people who write movies, TV shows, novels, or professors at the top of their field.
So let's take a look at the history of the critique of the work ethic, and I'm going to start in the present and work backwards. I was in London last weekend having a discussion of bullshit jobs with David Graeber from LSE. And he defines bullshit jobs as paid employment so pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious that even the employee can't justify its existence, although the employee must pretend that this is not the case. Graeber goes on to discuss a variety of bullshit jobs that were reported to him. And he contrasts bullshit jobs with shit jobs, which are actually socially useful jobs, socially necessary jobs, things like cleaning bedpans of patients and so forth, but which are poorly paid, get no respect, and are forms of drudgery. Graeber suggests that perhaps half of all work is bullshit. He does this on the basis of a sort of half-assed survey. 37 to 40% of workers in the UK and Netherlands who were polled suggested that they were working at bullshit jobs. Another survey, this is not particularly scientific, suggests that American office workers report half of their tasks are bullshit, or they just have to look busy or something like that. But I'm going to tell you some cases where my students...
Right, that's a very telling remark that the author of this book on BS jobs, right, he didn't do the work to substantiate his case, right, does not speak well of him. People with a negative attitude towards work are not usually people that you will have good reason to respect.
Last semester, I taught a course all about work, and we just did a section on bullshit jobs. And I asked them, how many of you have ever worked in a bullshit job? And lo and behold, 40% of my students raised their hand. Okay, so what were their jobs? So I had one student who had a summer job at a firm in which he was assigned to write business analyses of operations within the firm.
So a rejoinder to this is a big article in the New York Times today. Meet the neighbors who are retiring in their 30s. Why can't you? Right? Meet the schemers and savers obsessed with ending their careers as early as possible. Now, this sounds like a very impressive group of people, right? I'd much rather hang out with them than those who talk about most work being just BS.
And he would have to upload it into this internal website at the firm, and the website would count the number of times this report was downloaded, 0. So his job was to write reports that no one read. I can discuss other cases in Q&A, but I'm going to move on. So Graeber's proposal is, look, let's just eliminate bullshit jobs, and then we can cut the work week in half, share around the rest of the actual socially necessary task, and introduce a leisure society. In this respect, he was echoing the great economist John Maynard Keynes, who in his 1930 essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, criticized the work ethic because this goal of the endless accumulation of wealth is pathological. The idea that we should be working until we're practically dead is endlessly postponing pleasure and leisure, and that's just preposterous.
So my father was a Christian theologian and evangelist. He did 2 PhDs. He was a very hard worker. He got into the habit of getting up at 4 in the morning to work on his PhD thesis. He completed both of his PhDs in 18 months each. He did one in rhetoric at Michigan State University. He, in both cases, did his thesis, wrote his thesis while also meeting class requirements. So it took 18 months each, got one in rhetoric, one in apocalyptic, and then he went on to be an influential evangelical Christian theologian and scholar. Well, he really wasn't so strong on the scholarship. He wasn't so great on the details. Kind of like me. So with the new iPhone, all right, I had to get a new adapter for my Shure mic. And so I've been going around when I've been doing my live streams with an adapter and this Shure mic. And I've just been using, it's just been using my phone's built-in mic. So the adapter that I bought off Amazon for audio, right? It was an audio adapter from China, just hasn't been working. But I was so shoddy that I didn't even realize I was only using my iPhone's built-in microphone, not the beautiful sound quality that you get from the Shure mic. So that kind of shoddy lack of attention to detail characterizes people with ADHD, people like myself and my father and other people in close genetic relationship to me. But I disagreed with my father about many things. Obviously, I converted to Orthodox Judaism. But I was just thinking today, just before starting the show, maybe a major reason I do so many live streams is that I was influenced by my preacher daddy, inspired by my preacher daddy, or at least having a preaching mentality just got written into my DNA. And outside the realm of my consciousness, it's really important to me to be a better preacher than my father. Right? That's probably what's driving me. It's not something that I consciously think about, but just outside of the conscious, when I simply raise that as a possibility to myself just before launching this live stream, I thought, heck, this is probably why I do so many live streams. This is why I work so hard at this, because it's important to me to to be a better preacher than my father, because I did not agree with many of the ways that my father would operate, because the poor man had untreated ADHD, and he had all the results that come from that. For example, when you have ADHD, you tend to blurt things out. You don't allow people to finish. You interrupt people. And so when people try to ask my father a question, he would interrupt them very quickly and blurt out what he thought their question was. Okay, so my father, for all my disagreements and for all his flaws, he had some pretty sharp observations about me, and he would often get this look of deep pain on his face. So my father was not someone who radiated happiness. So people who know both of us would often remark that the primary personality difference between us was that my father did not come across as a happy man, and I do tend to come across as someone who's pretty happy. But one of my father's sharpest observations, he'd get with a look of great pain on his face, and he would say, kind of shaking his head and feeling great pain. And you're looking video of my father now doing what he loves more than anything in the world. You never saw my father happier than when he had an audience. And he particularly loved giving funerals because he felt that people were listening more closely to him while he was delivering a funeral than any other time that he was speaking publicly. And so he just absolutely loved giving funerals. He was pretty much obsessed with death. And so someone close to me would call my father Desmond. He would call him Deathman. So yeah, he was often thinking about death. And he had this sharp observation about me. He said, "You'll only learn through pain." And he'd say it with so much pain. And I remember the last time I really tried to talk to my father was approximately 1992. So a new friend of mine had come over, someone that I'd had a couple of very positive encounters with, and someone who was related to very stern theological opponents of my father. So it was kind of healing to make friends with this couple. And I was very lonely. I was housebound by chronic fatigue syndrome. I lived with my parents in an isolated part of Northern California. I was in Newcastle, 95658, about 45 minutes north of Sacramento. And so I really needed friends. And this one new friend came over. And after we had this enjoyable conversation, I thought, oh, I should bring you out to say hello to my father. He was out on the deck. And as soon as she came out and joined my father, he just started pummeling her. What do you think about evolution? What about this? And what about that? So it's kind of an ADHD 40-an intensity that she found incredibly upsetting, and she just fled. And that was effectively the end of the friendship. She would never come back around. And I was so upset because I was so lonely, and my father's unwitting behavior and intense questions and challenges and theological argumentative style had driven away one of the few new friends in my life. And I said, please don't provoke arguments with my friends. And so my father's reaction was, fine, I just won't talk to them. So for my father, there are only two modes that he likes to interact with people. One, where he lectures them or provokes them and tries to get into arguments with them. Or two, he would just minimize all contact. And so after that, he just decided he would try to minimize all contact. And so that was around that time, that was the last time that I tried to have a conversation with my father, because it never borne much fruit over the course of my life. But I said, Dad, why don't you tell me about what's going on with you? He had an embarrassing personal problem. And I said, why don't you share the sort of things with me? And he said, I wouldn't want to worry you. Well, when people confide in me, it doesn't worry me. Do I look pained? I know sponsees, people confide all sorts of horrible, difficult, challenging things in me, and it just doesn't bother me. But for my father, every time someone would confide something, or every time there was something in the news, it's like, he would just be so burdened by the news, by anything he heard, any difficulties. It's like, this world, I don't give a cracker for this fallen world. It was one of my father's favorite sayings, right? He was just all about heaven, where he'd get to reunite with his beloved first wife. And he was obsessed with death. He would look at people and see that they weren't exercising. They started to put on weight, and he'd go, that person will be dead in 5 years. So that's another reason he got the nickname Dr. Deathman. So not a happy man, particularly when he was pushed out of the Seventh-day Adventist church ministry. So he was a rock star evangelist within the Seventh-day Adventist church, but in 1980, he got kicked out of the church, and he formed his own evangelical nonprofit foundation called Good News Unlimited, but his life became increasingly isolated, and it was very, very sad for him. It was devastating for him, because he was removed from the college campuses where he'd been such a star, where he had received so much attention. And if my father wasn't getting attention, he was just dying inside. But my father would take bad things happening very personally. They would be a tremendous burden on him. And he'd get a very sad look. So, he would wince and grimace when he'd hear bad news. And he would say to me with this wince and grimace, "You're only going to learn through pain." And he was right. But the solution for 95% of the problems that he saw for me, the solution was ADHD medication and beef organ capsules. So my father wrote all these books about preventative health. My father loved to lecture about preventative health. My father made preventative health his life mission, but his message was overwhelmingly destructive to people and to himself. My father believed that a 90-10-10 diet was ideal, right? 90% carbs, 10% fat, 10% protein. This is an insane diet, right? You're much better, most people are going to be much better on something like the zone diet, where it's like 40% carbs, 30% fat, 30% protein. And as a result of this insane diet that my father had, where it was 90% carbs, right, he got diabetes in his 60s, even though he's so fanatical about his health regime, about running 4 or 5 miles a day and walking the same amount. But also his ADHD interfered with his ability to sleep. Once he got into the habit of getting up at 3 or 4 in the morning, he couldn't get out of that habit for the rest of his life, which severely curtailed opportunities to have normal social life. And he pushed the vegetarian diet. The vegetarian diet is really bad for people. Just look at Nathan Koffness's research, right? There are significant cognitive problems with the vegetarian diet, and there are all sorts of social problems, right? Kids, right, who are raised vegetarian, right? It makes them very unpopular. Vegetarians are very unpopular in social settings because they are a big pain to try to deal with, right? To accommodate. So is vegetarianism healthy for children? Very important essay here by Nathan Koffness, who did his PhD in the philosophy of biology. He did that at Oxford University. So you go to nathankaufness.com, click on the button that says papers, meaning academic papers. You can see his work on the dangers of vegetarianism. So my father largely devoted himself to something which he thought was doing good, but to the extent anyone took him seriously, it did far more harm than good. Proof of the definitive causation, I assert, not denying the probability. Look at Nathan Kaufness's article on Is Vegetarianism Good for Children? Right, Kaufness starts from an evolutionary perspective on most parts of life, whether morality or vegetarianism, obviously from the shape of our teeth, right, to how our digestive system works. We were built to eat meat. And vitamin B12, very difficult to assimilate outside of meat. Okay, so my father was right that I'd only learned through pain, and the pain eventually got bad enough that I went and got checked out for ADHD. And I knew that I had to find some way of ingesting meat, and about 3 years ago I found beef organ capsules. I took a chance on them, and my health problems completely turned around. My statement that my father's diet was the cause of his diabetes. I am not a medical doctor. I can't assert that for sure. But just think, what are the likely results having a lifetime diet where you aim for 90% carbohydrates? All right, so my absolute assurance that I knew better, right, it was particularly strong in my teens and 20s, like most people. But obviously that was something that I had to get beaten out of me. My attention seeking, right, always needing to be a star, my hyperbolic reactions, my dramatic rhetoric. I remember one girl who shared media class with me in my sophomore year at Placer High School said nobody knew what to do with his brain because I was like my father, a hyperactive squirrel, always trying to get into debates with people. The ADHD makes you such a pain to be around that it reduces your normal ability to connect with others, which isolates you, which makes you get filled with shame. You also have disproportionate and hyperbolic emotional reactions. You have extreme sensitivity to rejection sensitive dysphoria, you can call it. And so to provide a shield for that, both my father and I developed, strong attributes of narcissism, where we only got to feel okay when we were the center of attention. My father notices, very early on that I was not able to complete tedious tasks. Either I had to be the star, either it had to be exciting, either the task had to be immediately fulfilling, or I just struggled. Constantly seeking attention, qualities of both my father and I. It's funny, once I got the ADHD medication, that just calmed down considerably. Unwilling to stick to anything that does not lead to immediate rewards. My father exhibited more discipline than I did. I was never able to stick at anything unless I got immediate rewards. I consistently showed disrespect for other people, including teachers and bosses. And I would use work time to do my own thing. So I've probably been fired from about 30 jobs in my life. Hasn't been such a problem over the last 6 years. All right, now I've got the skills and the recovery from under-earning and debting and various emotional addictions that I don't have to walk around, fearing poverty and homelessness. In 1994, I was rushing in the rain over Malibu Canyon Road to rehearse a scene with a very attractive actress. And I was rushing on board tires in the rain. My car spun out and went into a light pole. Car was totaled, didn't have much money, but I was in a precarious financial position. I thought I need a vehicle that I can live in if necessary. And so I bought a 1982 Dodge van. A 1-ton Dodge van that got about 10 miles to the gallon. And that was my vehicle from 1994 until 2010. Boy, it looked like a serial killer van. I remember I'd be flirting with women sitting outside my van, and they'd get the message, hey, don't go out with this guy. Look at his van. Don't get into the back of his van. And the women would usually say something like, well, I'll make him buy me dinner first. So it's a symptom of ADHD as well, just blurting things out, which comes across to other people as disrespect and will also lead to disrespect for yourself. Right? constantly pursuing excitement, romantic liaisons, pursuing inappropriately intense relationships at work. All right, I do everything at work but work. So I took my first job at age 12. And then until I was 17, I lost every single job. Right? I got fired from about 5 different jobs. My knee-jerk rebellious attitude to life, right? Always wanted to dominate every group that I joined. I wanted to take it over, right? This ADHD need for constant stimulation, right? Constant need to show other people how smart I am, right? I try to pose questions in the most, cognitively demanding way possible. And my classmates or other people who were stuck at my lectures said, we're tired of your showing off. I can never understand what you're talking about. My lack of inclination to internalize the priorities of my teachers or my bosses, inattention to detail. So these are the things my father said, you're only going to learn through pain. All right, I was willing to work hard if I could be the center of attention, if I was getting immediate rewards, if I was being the star, right? I did well in journalism. I did fairly well as a blogger, right, where I got to be the star of my own website. But lack of attention to tedious details has cost me tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars, not to mention just opportunities of normal life, just being so sure I knew better than everyone else, disregard for the ordinary rules, thinking that I was above them, that the normal, ordinary rules do not apply to me. I still struggle with this at times, right? Using a work time, workplace, using work Wi-Fi, and then finding out later it tracked everything I was looking at on my phone, even when I was outside the office, right? That was a shock. I remember once I pulled up lookforward.net in the bathroom. All right, I was outside of the workplace, but I was still within 50 yards, 100 yards of company Wi-Fi, and company Wi-Fi detected that. I got this warning on my phone. This is a hate site. My own beloved blog, lookforward.net, is called a hate site. I mean, how hurtful is that? And then I was doomed after that, right? Once my bosses Googled me, it's like, oh, this guy's way too much liability. That's the number one reason people get fired, because they come to be seen as a liability. I remember another thing that I struggled with was the area of sexual harassment. I remember this one woman, very voluptuous woman, was constantly rubbing up against me at work, rubbing her large breasts on me. And then when I reciprocated any kind of flirtation, she reported me to HR. Reminds me of someone close to me who loved to tell jokes. And one day, this group of girls in his 10th grade class said, oh, tell us some jokes. So he told them a risque joke, and they laughed and laughed and laughed. Said, tell us more, tell us more. They insisted. So he told them a bunch of dirty jokes, and they just squealed with absolute delight through the whole process. And then they went and reported him to the teacher. Okay, the opposite of assume everyone knows everything. So much of my life, I've just tried to get away with things. As a preacher's kid, all right, there were substantial moral and speech and behavioral standards to live up to that I found overwhelming. I would quickly learn to code switch once I got out of the house. I'd talk like everyone else. But if I said bloody, right, just the word bloody, it's a swear word in Australia, all right, I would get reported for saying bloody. And I'd get into trouble, and I'd get back to my father. And so then he would assign me 30 to 40 pages of Christian apologetics to read every day, which helped me understand these very convincing philosophical arguments of Christianity, but also developed in me an intense emotional disregard or distaste or hatred for Christianity. So as a preacher's kid, I tried to get away with everything, and didn't work out so well. Women. My father told me you can't talk to a woman the same way you can talk to a guy, and still learning that lesson, showing deference and respect to people who can hurt me. People have been trying to teach me that lesson, but the rebel in me, the preacher's kid, the rebellious preacher's kid that still is just under the surface, is still getting me into trouble, overestimating my own talent, my own unique skills that I bring to the table, not caring about who I offend. Life of selfishness would not make me happy. My father was right about that. Just satisfying my animal appetites is not a strong foundation for happiness. You will only learn through pain. That's what my father would say, shaking his head. at age 12, I started running marathons. I finished 5. But my father said, this kind of, extreme endeavor is not good for you. And I'm sure he's right about that. And then I started working extreme hours, started working 90 hours a week. And my father said, this kind of extreme exertion, not good for you. And then I was taking 21 units at school and working 30 hours a week. And then I broke down into chronic fatigue syndrome. So my father was right that I was doing too much, too intensely, and I broke down. And my father was right that most of my misery was self-caused, but not deliberately caused. It was largely a result of my ADHD, the emotional addictions that I developed to try to handle my ADHD, and my disabling vegetarian diet. So, terrific New Yorker article out on work that I want to share with you. But let's get a little bit more from Elizabeth Anderson.
From the English, who were the great inventors, so I will be going back to the origins of the work ethic in 17th century England. But first, let's take a look at the work ethic.
Work ethic began in 17th century England. Right? Jews have had a strong work ethic of working 6 days a week for approximately 3,000 years. So Jews had the Protestant work ethic for 2,500 years. Or no, 1,000 to 1,500 years before the Protestants developed the Protestant work ethic.
American style. So these are common norms that arise in the American context. Americans think of work as central to their personal identity. We think it builds character. Many of us are on call at all hours. Certainly myself, I'm receiving emails and sending emails at all hours.
Yeah, people of Protestant heritage, people of Northeast Asian heritage, right? And maybe some other groups this is true of, but for a third of the American population that's on various types of welfare, not so much.
There's a huge stigma attached to being unemployed and also to receiving free stuff from the government, any kind of welfare benefits. And there's a kind of culture of performative workaholism, showing up and showing that you're working really hard and demonstrating to other people that you're working really hard. Here you can see the United States on the far right is the only rich capitalist country in the world that has 0 days of state-mandated paid vacation, 0. Now, of course, the many workers do have paid vacation through their employment contract. About half of workers, a little more than half of workers have paid vacation days through their employment contract. However, the vast majority of workers do not take all of their contractually eligible, entitled vacation days. So let's take a look at the history of the critique of the work ethic, and I'm going to start in the present and work backwards. I was in London last weekend having a discussion of bullshit jobs with David Graeber from LSE. And he defines bullshit jobs as paid employment so pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious that even the employee can't justify its existence, although the employee must pretend that this is not the case. Graeber goes on to discuss a variety of bullshit jobs that were reported to him. And he contrasts bullshit jobs with shit jobs, which are actually socially useful jobs, socially necessary jobs, things like cleaning, bed painting.
How did I repeat the same excerpt?
Hands of patients and so forth, but which are poorly paid, get no respect, and are forms of drudgery. Graeber suggests that perhaps half of all work is bullshit. He does this on the basis of a sort of half-assed survey. 37 to 40% of workers in the UK and Netherlands who were polled suggested that they were working at bullshit jobs.
Okay, so Sandra Singh Low teaches creative writing and performance at USC, and about 15 years ago she had this dinner party with largely Jewish professional women, high achieving, very well dressed, and it turned out they'd all dated me and they'd all had the same experience. Initially they were very excited to meet me, and then the more they learned about me, the more they got to know me, then the more intense their disappointment and the more quickly they cut ties. So one woman wrote a bunch of blog posts about dating me in June of 2006. She says, I met Luke Ford recently. He shared with me that he lived in a hovel. Interesting, I thought. I had also been living in what I considered a hovel, and she was living in something that was like 3,500 square feet. So I meet this character, this colorful, and perhaps even multiple personality acquaintance Luke Ford, who showed me his hovel, now that I know what it means. This poor schmuck, all right, he has far less than I do. He doesn't feel pity for himself. Seems completely content to live in the hovel. Ask him how long he's been there, and I think he says more than 9 years. So I sit on the desk chair in Luke's hovel as he makes a lemon tea with water from the bathroom sink. There is no kitchen. I watch him and I wonder to myself how he feels inside right now. I feel empathy for him. I know that for a man, their finances are a major sore spot for them. Luke obviously is not rich. I feel this need to let him know how much I adore him and that his lack of material possessions only make him more attractive to me. So I had a similar dynamic with Holly Randall, who remarked on a podcast that she tends to pay for most dates, and most men take offense at this, but for some reason it never bothered Luke when she would pay for me. So I'm ready to pack Luke up, put him in my purse, and take him home. His lack of material possessions only make it easier. It takes less time. I read on his website that many people ridicule him because of the way he lives in a hovel. I read some of the postings. They break my heart for him. They make me feel protective. I realize as I watch him dipping the tea bag for me how genuine and kind and pure the energy is that radiates from his soul. Yeah, a lot of people said I got good energy. I feel like I want to shout at all those people at this moment who refer to him as evil. Looking at him, he now appears to be an angel. Now he's talking to me and smiling as he dips the tea bag. I'm completely hypnotized by this man. Even though we are sitting in a room that brings memories of a jail cell to me, and yet when he touches me, I feel completely safe. He lights a candle, he hands me the tea, then in what I feel is a romantic gesture, he turns on Air Supply. I remember reading on his blog how much he loves Air Supply and how their lyrics translate his true feelings toward love in his search for a partner in life. Lost in love and I don't know much plays on the stereo, and we both giggle. Magical. We laugh some more. He reaches over and puts tea on the desk. I get nervous all of a sudden, like a schoolgirl. I feel completely out of control. My heart is racing. I'm flushed. Thank God I wore my trusty black turtleneck so he can't see how flushed and turned on I am. Why am I so nervous? I'm not exactly a virgin. Puts down the teacup. He leans toward me with both his hands, putting my hands in his. His eyes sparkle with boyish laughter. His lips are gently parted as he moves closer to me, saying my name. Yes, Luke. Yes, Luke. And then I say nervously with laughter, Luke, what is it? You want to fill out an application for the position of my husband, number 3. We both explode in laughter, and yet we are still connected with our hands entwined in one another. I feel such warmth from him, and I am lost in love. It's one of the greatest dating moments I've ever had in my life, and I am the queen of dating. Feel like a schoolgirl being kissed for the first time, like a lovesick puppy love. And the handsome prince in his hovel kisses me. My eyes gently close. He runs his hands through my hair. He turns off the lights. We both giggle again. Luke is an amazing kisser. Trust me, when you can orgasm from just kissing someone, that's a damn good kisser. I was feeling my body out of control. I felt a mixture of both excitement and embarrassment. We kissed for several minutes when he reached behind my shirt and unfastened my bra. The pop snapped me a bit out of the kiss, and I laughed again. I feel like I'm in high school with a crush on the guy who's the poet, and we're sneaking out in the parents' garage. It's fun. I fantasize about hanging out in his serial killer van. I love the idea because when you drive a car like that, people love you for you and not your money. Luke, the handsome prince, does not have a bed. He sleeps on the floor. Then I ask him the magic question. If you could have or be or anything in the world right now with all your desires, what would it be? I'd say my needs are simple. I want a wife that I love, a life that I love with God, and the ability to share my writing with other people. So this is a series of blog posts that got the title, The Ascent of Luke, pictures from Holly Randall throwing my 40th birthday party with Holly. There I am at Los Angeles Press Club. I want to take care of him, put my arms around him, and love him unconditionally. I remember in the 1980s listening to public radio, and I think it was a poet at Louisiana State University who was from some foreign country, had a very thick accent, and he was told very early on in his life that he would be doomed to live off women for the rest of his life. And I heard this in like 1986 when I was working like 90 hours a week, and I was just stacking away the money in savings, but somehow that resonated with me. Like I've always kind of had this sense that I was doomed to live off women.
Another survey, this is not particularly scientific, suggests that American office workers report half of their tasks are bullshit, or they just have to look busy or something like that. But I'm going to tell you some cases where my students last semester, I taught a course all about work, and we just did a section on bullshit jobs. And I asked them, how many of you have ever worked in a bullshit job? And lo and behold, 40% of my students raised their hand. Okay, so what were their jobs? So I had one student who had a summer job at a firm in which he was assigned to write business analyses of operations within the firm. And he would have to upload it into this internal website at the firm. And the website would count the number of times this report was downloaded, 0. So his job was to write reports that no one read. I can discuss other cases in Q&A, but I'm going to move on. So Graeber's proposal is, look, let's just eliminate bullshit jobs, and then we can cut the work week in half, share around the rest of the actual socially necessary task, and introduce a leisure society. In this respect, he was echoing the great.
Okay, so New Yorker article just came out. Work sucks. What could salvage it? New books examine the place of work in our lives and how people throughout history have tried to change it. And the article begins, there's a line in one of my favorite songs that's been tripping me up recently. We take care of our own, kicked off Bruce Springsteen's 2012 album, Wrecking Ball. And here's the stumbling block. Where's the work that'll set my hands, my soul free? So I think because America's a Christian nation, there's something deeply embedded in the Western Christian and post-Christian psyche that yearns for redemption, that yearns for salvation. And I don't resonate with that. I don't yearn for redemption. I know where I've gone off the rails, where I've hurt people, where I've been more of a burden than an asset to community. And so I have put into practice, right, amends to try to, turn around and reduce the harms that I've done previously and build up something good instead. But I don't feel the need for some dramatic redemption. I don't feel the need for salvation. But this yearning for salvation, it just seems to be just under the surface throughout Christian and post-Christian societies, including this New Yorker essay. And for the author, right, the idea of work setting people free was ominous. Why was it ominous? Because the Nazis had over some of their concentration camps, work will set you free. Like, just because the Nazis say water boils at a certain temperature doesn't mean they're wrong. And just because the Nazis put over a concentration camp, work will set you free, doesn't mean that's an ominous idea, right? Why do we just hand over so much of our discourse and so much of our thinking? Why are the Nazis like the one sacred value in the West that can be invoked for the ultimate of evil? So activists on the left have increasingly thought that the idea of work setting people free is ominous. 2015, the art scholar Miya Tokumitsu debunked the notion in a book, Do What You Love and Other Lies About Success and Happiness. Well, everything's situational. For 5%, 10% of the population, doing what you love and doing it really well is a good path forward in pursuing work and pursuing an education, right? If you love engineering, if you love computer programming, if you love being a lawyer or a doctor or a professor, then doing what you love is the path forward. For 90% of people, I would estimate that doing what you love is not the best strategy for paying the bills. So do what you love is a lie about success and happiness for 90% of people. But again, it's all based on this foundation of we need redemption, we need salvation. So even these Marxists are coming from this perspective, we need redemption, we need salvation, and I just don't share it. Like, if you have people in your life that you love and you are contributing to them, if you have family and extended family, you should have all you need to be fulfilled in life and to not have some desperate yearning for redemption. I'm not married with kids, but I have plenty of people in my life who I love, and I have my hobbies. And I just don't feel the need for redemption. I don't resonate with it. I don't share with that. I don't empathize with this big yearning for some ultimate redemption, some dramatic type of salvation. All right, another left-wing historian here, James Livingston, released a book, No More Work, and he explained why full employment is a bad idea. So I notice secular people kind of swing often to extremes. Like, religious people generally understand that work is just how the world works, right? From the book of Genesis, after Adam and Eve are kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God says to the woman, you will give birth in pain and the man will have to earn his bread through great exertion and sweat. Right? So usually traditional people, religious people, take it for granted that work is hard, and they don't look for redemption or salvation through work or through sex or through art or through nationalism, right? They have all the redemption and meaning and purpose and transcendence and salvation they need from their religion, from their family, extended family, community, or tribe, right? If you are a trad, if you're traditional, if you're right wing, right, you will have a skeptical view of human nature. You'll have more likely a tragic sense of life, and you'll take it for granted that we will all have to engage in a lot of tedious activity if we want to be upstanding members of our tribe, family, extended family, or nation, right? So this is just another example why I think the traditional perspective, the tribal perspective, the nationalist perspective is a far more effective, far more profound understanding of life rather than the liberal perspective, which is we're primarily individuals who are born with certain inalienable rights. What is it about bus drivers, man? They're just getting wailed on. It's crazy. Like bus drivers in LA, that they're walled off from passengers. Bus drivers in LA are going on strike. I mean, the assaults on bus drivers are crazy, just out of control. Boy, another symptom of the low levels of social trust, and that we're not getting super predators out there. All right, we could solve our crime problems very simply. Just take the super predators, the most violent, disruptive predators, and put them away in prison for a long time. Right, people who commit violent crime, if you put them away in prison for a long time, we can reduce our murder rates and violent crime rates to 10% of what they are currently. All we need is the will, the legislation, and the political dominance to enforce that. And you see what happens when law enforcement is incentivized to back off, and the United States is going to hell. Even though the mainstream media wants to tell you that murder rates are dropping. Yeah, compared to 2020 and 2021, murder rates in 2022 and 2023 dropped. But compared to 2014, 2013, right, murder rates are significantly higher, right? Thanks to Black Lives Matter exploding in 2014, and then again in 2020, right, we've disincentivized police and law enforcement from doing their job, and we've had a massive explosion in murder rates when our technology is getting better, right? Both law enforcement technology and life-saving medical technology. So all things being equal, murder rates should be dropping about 2% a year. And that they are much higher than they were in 2013 is a shanda. It's a scandal. It's outrageous.
Economist John Maynard Keynes, who in his 1930 essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, criticized the work ethic because this goal of the endless accumulation of wealth is pathological. The idea that we should be working until we're practically dead is endlessly postponing pleasure.
Well, some people are far better off working until they're almost dead, right? Some people can't handle freedom, right? If you got family, extended family, friends, community, hobbies, interests, commitments, you've got a coherent value system, hero system, all right, then you can probably handle freedom. But if you don't have those things, you're unlikely to make responsible use of your spare time and your freedom. All right, a lot of people, their lives just fall apart and they die shortly after retirement. We all need purpose, right? Once people have a why, right, they can overcome almost anything that's within their realm of possibility. So this idea of following your bliss, right, doing what you love, this is very much a liberal notion, right? Liberals believe that we're primarily individuals, and liberalism comes out of the Enlightenment. It believes that people are basically good, which is the most ludicrous perspective, and that we can create meaning and purpose and morality just in here, right? We have a buffered identity from this liberal left dominant ethos that just in here we can create all the meaning and purpose and morality and moral systems and understanding of right and wrong all on our own. This is not the traditional perspective. The traditional perspective on life, whether a religious perspective or just traditional, is that meaning and purpose and right and wrong exist outside of the individual, that we are not primarily individuals. We are primarily members of families, extended families, tribes, and nations. Right? As I go around in the world, I don't look at most people as primarily individuals. We all recognize people primarily as Muslim, or as Orthodox Jews, or as gay, or transgender, or African American, or Aborigine, right? we don't go to the cognitive expenditure of energy into looking at most people primarily as individuals. Now, for our loved ones, our friends, yeah, we'll look at them as individuals, but as we navigate our way through life, we primarily look at people as members of extended families, otherwise known as tribes and nations. But because liberal leftism, which dominates almost all of our institutions and dominates the news media, and it emerged out of the Enlightenment, right, believes that we have a buffered identity that we can decide right and wrong and meaning and purpose on our own. All right, out of that comes this idea that you should pursue your bliss, right? Follow your bliss, right? Very liberal left Enlightenment notion, not a conservative notion, not a traditional notion, not a tribalist notion, not a nationalist notion, right? For a nationalist and a tribalist and a devotee of his in-group, right, the welfare of your in-group is pretty much your highest priority, and you try to shape your life in accordance with the well-being of your group. So in Judaism, for example, virtually all the prayers are in the plural, right? The prayers that you say in Judaism are not for oneself, right? It's overwhelmingly for the people, right? The focus of Judaism is not the individual. The focus of Protestantism is the individual. The focus of secular humanism is the individual. The focus of liberalism and much of leftism is the individual, right? The focus of the news media and our dominant elite discourse, the focus is on the individual. But for right of center perspectives, the religious perspective, the tribal perspective, the nationalist perspective, the familial perspective, the focus is on the family and extended family, which is represented as a nation or a tribe. So from a right-wing perspective, either as a tribalist, nationalist, or religious person, right, the ethos is do your duty, right, not follow your bliss. The liberal left ethos is follow your bliss, right? The traditional ethos is do your duty, right? All traditional approaches to life, of which I'm aware, understand that life is brutal at times, it's difficult, and I'm not just talking about the happily married man who boasts to his wife, you know, my penis is a weapon of ass destruction, right? You know, that kind of destruction that goes on in the bedroom of lawfully married couples, right? I'm not going to cast judgment. There are rabbis who say anal sex is permitted as long as you don't finish there. Remember, a major rabbi in Los Angeles gave a shiur, a lecture based in Jewish text on whether or not anal sex was permitted. And when people arrived at the home for this shiur on whether anal sex was permitted, there was a big sign at the front door, please enter through the back. But if you're permitted to engage in anal sex, but you're not allowed to finish there, I mean, my God, you need to do a whole bunch of very thorough cleaning before you finish in the front door. I mean, that could be very lucrative business for traditionalists who believe that it is a sin to finish in the back door, that they still want the erotic pleasure provided by the back door, but then they want to conform to the teachings of their hero system, so they plunder the back door, but then need to do very, 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 very thorough cleaning before entering the front door. There's a massive business opportunity that I'm sharing with you. All these people I know, they're always talking to me about, oh, this could be a great side hustle for you. Well, I don't want the side hustle of, you know, helping men who are traditional, you know, observe halakha, Jewish law, by not finishing in the back door and providing some cleaning mechanism that is, you know, incredibly thorough so they can finish in the front door, right? That's not the kind of side hustle I want. But when people, you know, watch my videos, my friends, all right, these are friends, or they check out, you know, the various areas of my online endeavors, and they go, oh, this could be a great side hustle for you, right? You could teach people how to succeed online. And I'll admit, it's absolutely intoxicating right now to be speaking in front of 7 live viewers, all right? Yeah, what's the point of entering the back door if you don't finish it? That's because you're not an Orthodox Jew, bro. The whole point of entering the back door, like entering the front door, is to do God's will, all right? You should have a sense of the Almighty, you know, whichever set door you're entering, but you're not allowed to finish in someone's mouth either, right? Very serious sin, all right? You're not supposed to splooge over someone's breasts, all right? You're wasting seeds, so don't finish over someone's breasts, or don't use their armpit for finishing, don't use their mouth, and don't use the back door. These are all serious sins, and this could be a great side hustle for you, Brandon Smith. A great side hustle for you. Yeah, all my friends got this idea. It's like, great side hustle. Look, I work hard enough. I'm fair dinkum working. All right, I don't need any more side hustles. All I want to do is contribute to humanity by providing clarity, by providing, a strong moral, ethical, and realistic psychological, social foundation for life, right? I'm busy enough enumerating my rules for life and my principles for detecting reality, right? I don't need any more side hustles. Poet is a euphemism for unemployed. So you don't have to take the highest paying jobs that are offered to you, right? If you can make $40,000 a year as a poet and you love poetry and you're good at it, that might be a worthy endeavor. For most people, probably better to do a job that you love at $70,000 a year than an incredibly demanding taxing job at $115,000 a year. So we don't always have to go for the money. But the ethos behind this New Yorker article is that we need redemption. We need salvation. And that's the ethos behind much of culture that's created by the left. It's the ethos behind our dominant elites and media discourse, right? We need some dramatic form of salvation, and some people seek it in sex, and others in drugs, and others in alcohol, and others in extreme sports, or in being just a sports fan, or through having a big TV and a home entertainment system, or through work, going on various adventures or travel. But if you have a family that you like, if you have people that you like, if you're part of an extended family and community, let alone a religion, right? You don't feel this desperate yearning for redemption and salvation unless you're Christian, all right? I know that being raised a Christian, right, it leaves an imprint on you. So I've had Orthodox Jewish friends who would comment during my more difficult days that I yearn to be a martyr. So when my life was struggling, when my life wasn't working, when my life was just ricocheting from humiliation to humiliation, all right, then I yearned for some grand dramatic gesture. And we heard Elliot Blatt yesterday talking about he wanted to make a grand dramatic gesture of leaving a big tip for this woman with lobster claws for arms. So if you're into lobster claws for arms, you'll like the 3-season TV show, which I believe is on Netflix, Loudermilk. It's about a misanthropic drug and alcohol counselor. And there's a rock drummer with lobster claws for arms who's a prominent figure in Loudermilk. So solid show, and some wisdom in it as well, and funny. It's made by one of the Farley brothers who did There's Something About Mary.
And at leisure, and that's just preposterous. And he too argued that we should just bring about a leisure society as soon as we achieve enough prosperity that everyone can live decently.
Look, there's no work that will set you free. There's no sex that will set you free. There's no one relationship. There's no marriage that will set you free. There's no hobby that will set you free. There's no live stream that will set you free, right? Freedom has to begin from within with a sense of ease with oneself, right? A sense of peace with oneself, right? If you have, a decent relationship with yourself so you don't hate yourself, then these external things can come along and unleash freedom and opportunity. But as long as you're filled with self-loathing, as long as you don't understand yourself and don't like yourself, right, there's no external redemption, salvation that's going to come along, right? You may be tempted to invest yourself in religion for ultimate salvation or psychotherapy for ultimate salvation, but until you do the internal work of coming to a sense of ease with yourself, right, these external solutions won't work, right? There's no external solution for an internal problem. There's no non-spiritual solution for a spiritual problem. There's no non-biological solution for a biological problem. There's no non-social solution for a social problem. There's no non-psychological answer for a psychological problem.
And suggested that by sharing around the remaining work, maybe we'd only have to work 3 or 4 hours a day. And finally, we can go to the original.
Look, there are forms of work that can unleash you if you've otherwise got yourself together. I mean, my work as a journalist and a writer, when I could just write full time, which I pretty much did between 1997 and 2012, because I kept writing during my Alexander Technique training. All right, those were intoxicating years. And to whatever extent I had, quote unquote, good energy. All right, when we say someone's got good energy, it means that they largely live in reality, that they're not filled with delusions about themselves and the people around them. All right, so to the extent that I had good energy and then I could build on those opportunities to devote myself to writing, right, that was incredibly intoxicating and freeing. Yeah, work meant freedom when your work is writing, when you're producing cultural artifacts, right, when you are producing learned tomes, right, when you are shaping the culture, right, that kind of work is incredibly intoxicating and freeing if you have some sense of reality and basic ease with yourself.
Original critique of the work ethic, scholarly critique, and that is in Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Weber didn't do a half-assed job. He did a really serious job studying the original work ethic texts. And in 1920, having read the Puritan ministers who invented the work ethic, he argued that the Puritans had bestowed an amazingly good conscience in the acquisition of money. And as the work ethic secularized, that good conscience about wealth accumulation continued without its theological basis, and ultimately ended up rationalizing capitalist exploitation of workers' internalized willingness to work. So the internalization of the Puritan work ethic by workers that carried over even under secularization just enhanced the ability of capitalists to exploit workers. He described the situation as an iron cage and famously argued, the Puritan wanted to work in a calling, but we are forced to do so. I think it's worthwhile then to go back and actually read the Puritans who invented the work ethic.
As Puritans didn't invent the work ethic, they just took it from the Jews. Iron cage. Does that sound familiar? One of my favorite concepts. We're all locked in an iron cage together, and nobody's coming to rescue us. Nobody's coming to rescue you, right? No one's coming to save you. No one's coming to rescue you, and no one's coming to rescue us, right? Yet we're locked in an iron cage with people who hate us, with people who want to take everything that we have, with people who want to eliminate us from life. And so the best way to survive when you're locked in an iron cage with people bent on killing you is to make yourself and your people, your nation, as strong as possible. So that's one of the foundations of my worldview.
Central figure that Weber, I think, properly identifies is Richard Baxter from the 17th century. He's articulating a Puritan theology, which is essentially Calvinist. So you start off with justification by faith alone. Salvation is based on faith alone, not works. However, Baxter also argued that you can't really know whether you have faith except through your behavior. So the Puritans were behaviorists. You can't know by introspection whether you really have faith.
If you have a traditional conception of life that largely revolves around the family and you're a man, you understand that you're going to have to devote yourself to work. I mean, the Jewish way of life in particular is incredibly expensive, right? Day school, tuition, $20,000 to $50,000 a year. So trads who understand that people are not basically good, they recognize that life is going to largely revolve around work. Not something that people on the left generally understand. So perhaps most influentially, back to this New Yorker article on work sucks, what can we do about it? The anarchist anthropologist David Graeber, who doesn't take the time to do solid scholarship, he just emotes. But he can construct words in a way that's appealing. It's just that he lacks factual foundation for his very attention-grabbing language. So he fired off a best-selling salvo in 2018 against the bullshit jobs he says were ubiquitous in the 21st century. And I noticed so many people who are chronic under-earners who have inherited this disdain for work, right? I have not had good experiences with people who disdain work. They're not the type of people that I want to build my life around. The idea that work was necessary to our flourishing, right? This is a liberal left idea, right? Trads understand that life is inherently difficult, and pursuing our own flourishing is not really what life is all about. What we should be doing is building, strengthening, and protecting our families, extended families, our community, our tribe, and our nation, right? As a tribalist and a nationalist, you understand that the locus of your attention is the nation, the tribe. It's not your individual pursuit of bliss. So it's just so jarring to hear this liberal left rhetoric, which is just so contrary to the way of life of most people that I'm close to. So, but on the liberal left, right, some of them have the idea that work is inherently evil, and others have the idea that work is necessary to our flourishing. Both extremes are absurd, right? That's why I think the traditional right-wing conception that life is hard and people are not basically good and we're all locked in an iron cage together, so if we're going to survive, we need to make ourselves and our loved ones as strong and protected as possible, right? So much more realistic, right? That's why my rules for life and my principles for detecting reality are so much more profound than what the New Yorker and the New York Times hands out. But for much of the left, there's this idea that work is necessary to our human flourishing. Since I hear the term human flourishing, like human empowerment, has tricked us into forswearing the increased leisure that nearly 2 centuries of mounting economic productivity made available to us. So this is largely an argument between Marxists. So this shoddy anthropologist David Graeber says, we have acquiesced to the schemes of capital to stuff our hours full of pointless and pernicious work. And then COVID struck, millions of people found out that they were inessential, and the anti-work forum became one of the most active communities on Reddit. I don't think Orthodox Jews and traditional people with families are spending much time on the anti-work forum on Reddit. New York Times announced an age of anti-ambition, right? Not true for trads, not true for people with families. New York Review of Books reissued 19th century pamphlet, The Right to be Lazy, right? Then some on the left defend the idea that work is an important site of self-realization. So because the liberal left ethos is that we're buffered, all right, that meaning, purpose, and morality can be created inside our head, there's also a dominant perspective in this liberal left way of thinking that the most important thing in life is self-realization. From a trad perspective, a right-wing perspective, a conservative perspective, a religious perspective, a nationalist perspective, all right, it's absurd to think that the purpose of our life is self-realization, right? If you're on the right, generally speaking, you understand that the purpose of life is the well-being, safety, and survival of your people. So Elizabeth Anderson is leading the charge that work is important for self-realization. She's a philosopher at the University of Michigan, leading scholar and critic of workplace politics. In a 2019 book, Private Government, How Employers Rule Our Lives and Why We Don't Talk About It, one of the century's most important works of political philosophy, Anderson argues that Americans have essentially outsourced totalitarianism to the private sector. This is a very profound point. Normally, when you go to work, you're essentially a slave when you're at work. And there are better ways of being a slave and there are worse ways of being a slave, but you are a slave. But anyone who is decent and holds to any kind of thoughtful hero system is going to be a slave to that hero system. All right, if you're an Orthodox Jew, you're a slave to the kingdom of heaven. Right? If you're an Orthodox Jew, you're a slave to protecting and providing for your family. If you're an Orthodox Jew or you have any kind of tribal or national identity, you're a slave to a higher morality, to the well-being and protection and survival of your people. And so from a traditional perspective, being a slave is just something we take for granted, that much of life is drudgery, much of life is tedious, but the good person, the upstanding person, the person who deserves to be honored, is willing to undergo that which is difficult and tedious, is unwilling to undergo drudgery to provide for people they love who constitute family and extended family. But on the liberal left, it's all about self-realization and human flourishing. But this is an interesting point, that we've outsourced totalitarianism to the private sector. For all our talk about the sacrosanct values of freedom and democracy, most of us spend our days toiling in subordination to bosses who wield control over many aspects of our lives. Yeah, simply doing a show like this would make me too much of a liability for big employers, generally speaking. And they would find a way to fire me. Because even though I'd never talk about any work that I do for them or reveal anything, right, they would still just consider it too much of a liability that I'm a public figure, saying my piece on YouTube, even though only 10 people are watching.
A sure sign of faith is constant, disciplined labor for the greater glory of God. Any moment of idleness and sloth is a sign of backsliding in your faith. So, bolt of lightning can come down and take you out at any moment. So you should be in constant terror, right? If you're struck down in a moment of idleness, you're just headed for hell. Better nose to the grindstone then. or as Baxter says, give diligence to make your calling and election sure. The citation is to his wonderful work, Saints' Everlasting Rest. So here are the principal components of the work ethic as the Puritans developed it. Duty number 1, engage in disciplined work in a calling. God has called everyone to some specialized occupation. You got to figure out what that is and then dedicate your life to it. Secondly, don't waste any time. Don't be idle. Importantly, even the rich must work. I'm going to get back to that point. Thirdly, don't waste any material goods. God has given natural resources for people to use to carry out God's will. It's an ascetic doctrine, so people shouldn't indulge in worldly goods and pleasures and anything that is just tending to their vanity. One must not be covetous. That is, and he defines covetousness, that's a sin, very, very strictly. It consists in wanting more material goods than one strictly needs to do one's duty. Think about that. That's not very much that anyone needs. However, at the same time, he also argues that every man should frugally getteth and saveth as much as he can. And what essentially that means is, given a choice between a higher paid and a lower paid occupation, you actually have a duty to choose the higher paid one.
So I was just telling a friend that I'm dropping truth bombs, that I'm decoding work. It's deeply philosophical and yet so practical and sexy.
Going to discuss later on what appears to be an evident contradiction between points 5 and 6. Baxter knew about this and he had a solution. Weber correctly argues that over time the work ethic got secularized. And on that point I'm in full agreement with Weber. But here's the point, the critical point where I disagree. Weber only reveals one half of the work ethic, what I'm calling the conservative path to secularization that rationalizes harsh discipline of workers and their exploitation. What I'm going to be arguing, and that's the chief thesis of this talk, is that there was...
So traditionalists, tribalists, nationalists, religious people, by and large, don't expect to get fulfillment from work. They expect to get fulfillment from family. That's the normal thing. A normal, healthy person primarily expects to get fulfillment from family, and then if there's not enough family to occupy them, from extended family. If there's not enough family and extended family to occupy them, then they have more room in their life for friends and for hobbies. Only a tiny percentage of people have any realistic shot at being occupied and fulfilled through work.
Was another side of the work ethic that is profoundly pro-worker, and that side of the work ethic had its own history and profound influence on the subsequent history of political thought as it got secularized. But first, we'll just take a look at the conservative path.
So much of left-wing thought is just so incredibly naive and utopian, right? For people on the right, all right, we understand that people are not basically good, but people on the left, influenced by the Enlightenment, do see people as basically good. And so they have these utopian aspirations to find redemption and meaning and purpose through sex, through hobbies, through work, through therapy, through political activism, through saving the planet, through extreme sports, through art and culture. Right? People on the right don't need to find redemption and salvation and purpose and meaning from these things nearly as much as people on the left. Right? People on the right understand your primary source of meaning and fulfillment and purpose in life should be from your family.
On the left-hand column, we'll see the theological doctrine. On the right-hand column, we'll see how that doctrine gets secularized. So theologically, the Puritans thought that the poor stood to the rich as lazy sinners stand to the hard-working. In secular terms, this amounts to the idea that receipt of honor and esteem is conditional on achieving self-sufficiency that is not depending on others, either charity or government welfare payments or something, to survive. And also a presumption that the poor are undeserving, a presumption that if one is poor and able-bodied, it must be that one is lazy. That inference is licensed by the conservative.
I don't know about your life experience, but when I look around me, I notice that rich people have worked a lot harder and many more hours than the poor people I know. Generally speaking, in the world I see, those who've become rich have worked harder and smarter and more effectively, and many of the really poor people I know have worked ineffectively, slovenly and carelessly.
Path to secularization. Theologically, it was considered a bourgeois duty to maximize profits by disciplining.
Love is a bourgeois duty. What's that song by Pet Shop Boys? Something about bourgeois duty.
Workers. And that turns into the modern neoliberal doctrine of shareholder capitalism, the idea that the sole duty of the corporation is to maximize profits, and that public policy should be oriented towards facilitating that by systematically favoring capital over labor. I take that to be practically definitional of neoliberal policy. Thirdly, theologically, in order to maximize profits, you got to squeeze the workers' wages, and that's going to lead to a class of working poor. The Puritans' favorite.
Okay, that was the Pet Shop Boys. Love is a bourgeois construct. Now I'm digging through my student paperbacks, flicking through Karl Marx again, searching for the soul of England, drinking tea like Tony Benn, who is a big left-wing politician in England. Love is just a bourgeois construct, so I'm giving out the bourgeoisie until you come back to me. I'm a big fan of the Pet Shop Boys. So what happens when you put more pressure on a banister or on anything, a balcony, than it can hold? It crashes. All right, so if you expect your redemption, meaning, and purpose in life to come from work or from sex or from art or culture or political activism, in all likelihood, you're going to put more pressure on that construct than it can handle, right? If you get your meaning and purpose in life from feeling romantically in love, right? This is a construct that is going to collapse, right? You expect sex, drugs, alcohol, sports, culture, political activism, art, right, to be your foundation for meaning and purpose in life. You will put more pressure on this construct than it can handle, and it will crash, and you will crash with it, right? And only people on the left who have this idea that meaning, purpose, and morality is something that we can just develop inside our own head, right? Because we lead buffered lives. Right? I think people on the left are going to be much more vulnerable to constructing these constructs for meaning and purpose and foundation in life that simply will not bear up under the pressure of life.
Biblical phrase, quotation, was "He who does not work shall not eat."
Not a bad idea. Like, you don't want to reward antisocial behavior, and not working and taking welfare is generally antisocial behavior if you're capable of work. So many people just fall apart without the discipline of work. Right? Generally speaking, I notice that work is among the most enabling pursuits. It consistently seems to make people better, because if you're going to be effective at work, you have to internalize other people's priorities and replace your own ego and your own presumptions and your own inclinations with what other people want you to do. So many people just fall apart and die when they don't have their work, right? Many people just fall apart upon retirement. Others do fine, right? What type of people do fine with freedom and retirement, right? Those who have family, extended family, a coherent hero system, a religion, a community, commitments, hobbies, interests, and people that they love. So nothing is intrinsically good for everyone. You can drink too much water, right? Water is a great thing overall. Fire is a good thing when used appropriately, but fire can kill. Water can kill. There's nothing that is just intrinsically good for everyone. Not work, not religion, not marriage, not sex, not sport, not YouTube, not Luke Ford. Right? People want to be relieved from responsibility. People want to get a break from making choices so they can just say, oh, the whole purpose of life is work or religion or psychology or therapy or political activism or sex or sports or culture or art, right? People love a magic key to life. Oh, the whole key to how the world works is the Jews or the capitalists or the communists or Antifa, right? There's no magic key at life, right? There's no one thing that's always intrinsically good for you, right? People want to be relieved of responsibility by clinging to a magic key, and that magic key will then enable them to point fingers and say, look, the problem with the world is the bosses, the Jews, the capitalists, the blacks, the Muslims, right? So whether you're trying to base your meaning and purpose in life on a foundation of work or on love or on religion or on therapy or on yoga or on Starbucks, right, or on sex, right? These can all seem redemptive briefly, but they will all fall apart. Now, there are many paths to a better life, right? There are many fraudulent approaches to life, but when used appropriately, all right, marriage, religion, community, political activism, hobbies, art, culture, right, can be one part of a good life. Let me play a little bit more from Elizabeth Anderson.
And in secular terms, that turned into a public policy preference in favor either of workfare over getting.
So everything that we think about work is something that we've gotten from society, right? In all likelihood, almost none of us come up with any original thinking on this topic. And so because almost everything is socially influenced, if not socially created or conditioned, all right, there really isn't an intrinsic quality to Jews, to gays, to Muslims, to blacks, to Europeans, to Norwegians, right? How these different groups manifest themselves would depend on the situation and the context. Everything is either socially constructed or at least socially influenced. Right? I've been fired over 30 times in my life. That all occurred in the United States, which has fewer worker protections than any other first world of which I'm aware. And I don't necessarily want the United States to develop more worker protections. I haven't thought it through. I don't have any position on that. But even getting fired is not just something that has to do with me. It's partly to do with me, but it's also socially conditioned. Right? I started working at age 12. Most people don't start working 20 hours a week at age 12.
Free stuff, if you want to receive, if you're too poor to survive on your wages alone.
So why do so many of my friends want me to develop side hustles, right? Because starting in the 1970s, there was this widespread idea that the awesome thing is to work for yourself. But that's an entirely socially constructed idea. I don't know, half the people I talk to about work think the ultimate goal is to work for yourself, and it's baloney. It's a socially constructed idea that developed in the havoc of the 1970s. It doesn't work for 95% of people. It's usually a delusion. I notice people go into 12-step programs like Underowners Anonymous or Financial Underowners Anonymous or Debtors Anonymous, and they have these projects and they think these 12-step programs will make their entrepreneurial dreams come true, and that almost never happens, right? To really get the benefit of a 12-step program, you have to allow it to transform you and to transform your priorities. You can't just use it to try to accomplish your entrepreneurial dream.
Rather than just getting free stuff from the state, you should work for it or rely on private charity. Theologically, the doctrine was that nobody is entitled to leisure that hasn't been earned. Rest must always follow labor, said Baxter. And that turns into the American doctrine that.
So yeah, I usually would feel incredibly degenerate just watching TV, watching a movie, watching a documentary in the morning. I feel that that's only something I deserve after I've worked hard. And most people from Northeast Asia, such as Japan, China, and Korea, certainly agree with me, as well as people of Protestant heritage.
Nobody is entitled to paid vacations if they haven't earned them and secured them in their private wage contract.
So as opposed to Australia, where everybody gets a month of paid vacation a year with something like 15% loading on top.
Obtained in the labor market. And also no paid leaves as well, another condition of American workers. Theologically, work was considered a kind of ascetic discipline. If your nose is to the grindstone, your mind doesn't have any time to wander to sinful thoughts of lust and sloth and so forth. And in secular terms, that turned into the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. That is, it's the imposition of labor, the fact.
And on Twitter, the Mighty Puck says, David Graeber, who died recently, was an interesting writer. Here he is talking about his book, Debt, The First 5,000 Years. He is a Marxist. He likes big ideas. He does tend to gloss over boring details. Different people have different gifts.
That one is working under the thumb of a boss who is putting one to this ascetic discipline. However, I argue that there's a completely other side of the work ethic that is pro-worker, and one can read that in the original text. So I'm going to start with Robert Sanderson, another famous Puritan, who wrote a wonderful sermon on how one will discover, how can one discover what is one's calling? God has is calling each person to a distinctive occupation, a specialized occupation. But how are you supposed to know that? Sanderson.
All right, so Elizabeth Anderson, who's speaking in this video, she has a new book out. She believes it's possible to redeem work from managerial autocracy. This is the New Yorker article. Her new book is called Hijacked: How Neoliberalism, which means untrammeled capitalism, turned the work ethic against workers and how workers can take it back. So most people think, oh, neoliberalism, that's an updated version of a left-wing politics. No, neoliberalism generally stands for untrammeled capitalism. So she argues that demands for freedom at work should go hand in hand with efforts to make work morally valuable. Workers deserve liberation because working is or ought to be intrinsically good. And she approves of the progressive work ethic, the intellectual tradition that connects mid-century European social democracy, Marxism, and the classical political economists. And she believes that this all originates with the Puritans, who railed against the idle rich and the idle poor for shirking their divinely imposed obligation to find a calling and keep at it. Puritans get a bad rap these days. The Protestant work ethic nowadays makes us think less of Marx's Association of Free and Equal Producers and more of ulcers and back pain and Willy Loman's spiritual disintegration. Well, I don't think that's true. The Protestant work ethic gets a bad rap in perhaps circles who read the New Yorker. So Anderson says this is because the work ethic has been hijacked. Conservatives in the early days of industrial capitalism, such as Thomas Malthus, Jeremy Bentham, Joseph Priestley, and Edmund Burke, perverted the principle into a gospel of uncomplaining submission to bosses, even when they failed to demonstrate their own commitment to productive effort. Work didn't need to be made good. It was always and already good, so the poor should be forced to perform it by whatever means necessary. And from Anderson's perspective, these two visions of the work ethic developed in parallel. The progressive one expands the Puritan disdain for the idle rich into a systematic critique of economic inequality, inspiring the creation of the modern European welfare states, and the conservative critique used by capitalists animates contempt for poor that we see at the heart of social policy making in the US today. This is delusional. I don't think that contempt for the poor is at the heart of social policy making in the US today. The work ethic starts to feel a bit like the Force in Star Wars. There's a light side and a dark side. You have to choose one because its power is so irresistible. Its power is not irresistible to those who love their families, right? Those who feel connected to a particular people, a particular tribe, particular religion, particular nation, right? The allure of finding redemptive power in work is easily resistible. For Anderson, however, she's on the left. The stakes are that high, confronting global issues such as inequality, democratic decay, and climate change, right? You have to be on the left to make these your priority normally, will require a great deal of work. So today's progressives should reclaim the idea that work can be redemptive. But are these two sides really so easily disentangled? She acknowledges that the work ethic contains the seeds of its own corruption. Can any work ethic worth the name be a good thing, asked the New Yorker. If human flourishing requires devotion to productive work, as the work ethic insists, surely we ought to instead frown on institutional arrangements that encourage loafing. Okay, you have to be on the left to talk about human flourishing and to be so deluded to think that human flourishing requires devotion to productive work. If you're on the right, you understand that productive work and paying attention to mundane details is just an essential part of your obligations as a member of an extended family, right? People on the left talk far more about rights. People who are traditional talk far more about obligations. The case against the dictatorship of bosses is so ironclad, according to the New Yorker. Well, sometimes a dictatorship is the most efficient way to run things. So I don't think the case against dictatorship of bosses is ironclad. If you get paid more, if you get better working conditions, a more exciting job, right, a more productive and rewarding career, by subjugating your ego to the dictatorship of bosses, all right, you may well be better off than more democratic arrangements. Right, sometimes a democratic arrangement's better than an authoritarian dictatorship, but plenty of times a xenophobic authoritarian regime is the way to go. Now, perhaps the solution from left-wing perspective is not union power or collective worker ownership of the means of production, but rather self-employment. This is the most widespread delusion I see about work around me today. Benjamin Waterhouse is a historian at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is a deft chronicler of executive class escapades, and he tells the history of this clever maneuver in his new book, One Day, I'll work for myself. The dream and delusion that conquered America, and conquered it has, man. Rise of neoliberal policymaking in the US has channeled the conservative work ethic to a new direction. It's channeled it in the direction of the entrepreneurial work ethic. It's the idealization of self-employment and the self-actualizing job creator as a model for the workforce to emulate, right? It's a good model for perhaps 5% of people to emulate. 95% of people are better off having a boss. So I worked for myself for a long time when I was a blogger and writer and just all around bon vivant personality. But when I took a job in 2012, it was a relief, right? Because I didn't have to think about work when I wasn't at work. I could just go to work and I could do the things that were asked of me, and I got a guaranteed paycheck and the benefits that go with that. And I didn't have to think about work when I wasn't on the job, and I didn't have to think about, making new ideas, new strategies. I just didn't have to worry. I just showed up, did my job, got a paycheck. So, but for most people, most of the time, you want to be an employee. The easiest way to make money is to go work for someone, right? Not taking seminars on how to make money online. The aspiration to self-employment is not something that's intrinsic to the American character. It has a history. It has a context like everything else, right? Everything we think and feel pretty much is socially created. So this idea that we should aspire to self-employment is a product of the late 20th century, particularly the economic crises of the 70s and early 80s. So during the prosperous decades after the Second World War, not many people thought working for oneself was appealing, right? Large corporations were generous, right? Workers desired a piece of the pie, and they desired to work for someone else. Poor black workers in a march on Washington demanded not freedom, but jobs. All right, very different from Richard Nixon's program created a few years later for minority business enterprise. Right, the young elites featured in William White's The Organization Man came out in the 1950s. They showed little interest in going into business for themselves. Instead, they focused their energies on climbing the corporate ladder. Then in the 70s, things fell apart. You got stagflation, unemployment, oil shocks, jobless recoveries, financial turmoil. So the big hierarchical corporations that bestrode the business landscape of the 1950s and 60s looked like outdated relics. So back in the 70s, there's much discussion about the evil of multinational corporations. You don't hear that nearly as much today. So America began to listen to a new generation of business gurus. Americans love gurus. Its individualist ethos believes that there's some more exciting way to live that's just going to set you apart from everyone else, while people in most everywhere else in the world don't primarily want to set themselves apart from their friends. They want to bond with their friends and family. But we had in the 70s and 80s these new business gurus and management experts, people like Tony Robbins, who claimed that the road to renewed growth would be paved by these brave entrepreneurial risk takers who embrace change and start their own companies. And you had this MIT economist David Birch producing a widely cited statistic popularizing the idea that small businesses were responsible for 80% of job creation in the US. Right, this study was bunk, right? Had serious methodological issues. His findings do not replicate, but the idea just constantly gets invoked in conservative talk radio and among many Americans who have this idea that entrepreneurship, that's the path to self-actualization. So when upward promotion at a traditional job came out of reach for many people, the American dream seemed to instead require building a business yourself or buying one and reaping the rewards. So you got major corporations in industries like fast food and direct selling that created organizational schemes such as franchising and independent contracting, and they depicted themselves as engines of small business creation, even though they would continue to exert significant control over the working conditions and decision-making of their ostensibly entrepreneurial workforce, a bit like today's gig economy. People who gave self-employment a try, usually found it required more work and more difficulties and just didn't pay off, right? It was much worse than being a worker among workers. Now, being a worker among workers is not exciting. It's hard to have some grandiose conception of yourself when you learn to internalize the priorities of your superiors, but it's just an effective way to go through life. So there's a Mexican immigrant, Antonio Perez, who graduates from selling merchandise on the street to owning his own grocery store in Chicago. But his sales at the store were so inconsistent, found himself driving a truck around the city, peddling products on the street in his spare time. I know professionals who've given serious consideration to driving for Uber. I mean, the gig economy has been lifted up as, you know, some kind of entrepreneurial vision. That's why so many of my friends want me to develop a side hustle.
Like Puritans generally tend to be dismissive of any kind of superstitious idea that God will just reveal his will for you in a dream. That's not how it happens. How do you find out what your calling is? Well, you consult your talents. What are you good at? Your education. What skills have you managed to develop? And your personal tastes. What kind of work would you like to do? And if you absolutely loathe something, even if you're good at it, maybe you shouldn't choose that. He also suggests, he recommends that people searching for their calling should consult their parents who love them and know them very well and probably have some good advice. In other words, what Sanderson did was invent modern career counseling. Now, another beautiful thing that you can find in Puritan thought is the way they turn duties into individual rights. And here you can see it. If you have a duty, a God-given duty to follow your calling, but your calling is fundamentally based on your personal dispositions and talents and preferences, that duty has a corresponding right to free occupational choice, which is actually profoundly liberating. One must work for the greater glory of God. And what does that amount to? Well, the Puritans are very earthly about this. One thing that they despised was monkish activity. So they thought just praying all the time or lighting candles and rituals, that's just a bunch of nonsense. It's just rubbish. No, it was not works in the religious sense that mattered. It was work in the profane sense, which gets sacralized by the Puritans. Work for the greater glory of God consists in advancing human welfare. So the Puritans were the original utilitarians. Work has to have that positive social function, helping other people. Another Puritan, John Angier, commanded that all must spiritualize their callings and earthly businesses. In other words, what he's saying is that what's ordinarily considered profane activity actually should be considered sacred. Working for the greater glory of God is equivalent to working to help your fellow human beings.
Right, so many people who start their own businesses, they have this idea that they're going to become, you know, far superior to the bad bosses that they endured. They were trying to get away from. But what creates a bad boss? It's not usually intrinsic horrible qualities in a person. It's a very difficult situation, right? Being a boss is not easy, which is why bosses make more money than workers. So you had people who seeking to become entrepreneurs, and they joined with the corporate Goliaths in a full court press against regulations and worker protections. They repudiated the organization man paradigm of the post-war corporate world, but it didn't make the American economic landscape any less corporate. It just made corporate dominance harder to see. So should we turn back the cultural clock? Waterhouse is reticent on this question. He bemoans the message trumpeted on a billboard he just saw: working for other people sucks and you should stop it. Well, life frequently sucks. Like, what's the alternative, right? For most people, the alternative to working for someone else is an inferior alternative. Right, the billboard sounds like an ad for some sort of gig economy scam or for some libertarian propaganda mill, but it's also true, right? Working for other people does suck, and it would be nice not to have to do it. Yeah, it sucks in comparison to some idealization of reality, but in comparison with realistic chances, it's usually the best way to go. We usually don't have a choice. Right, so anti-work thought has gained tremendous traction, largely on the left. So the idea that the good life occurs mostly outside the workplace has a long history. Yeah, because for most people, the good life occurs with their family. Right, the idea that you should primarily get the good life at work is a bizarre conception. Right, another new book that's come out, Free Time, The History of an Elusive Ideal, by Penn State cultural historian Gary Cross. It says abundant and meaningful leisure time remains a distant fantasy, especially in the United States. All right, we have far less free time than people in Europe and Australia. Free time is a scarce resource, and the way we use it belies its preciousness. Yeah, people often can't handle their free time. They don't use it effectively. But the more you track things, the more you'll have of them. So if you track how you earn money and how you spend money, the more money you'll have. If you track how you spend your time, you'll have more time. So we often drive ourselves insane on our phones, spend hours watching garbage on Netflix, then drive ourselves insane by fighting on our phones about the garbage we watch on Netflix. Yeah, but if you have substantial obligations to your family, to your extended family, to your community, to your religion, to your nation and tribe, right? You're not going to waste time like this. So this professor argues that quality and quantity of free time are intertwined. It's easier to devote our dwindling leisure to buying stuff than to pursue deeper forms of social and personal exploration. Well, the more diverse society gets, right, the less we have in common with each other, the less inclined people will be to spend time in society. Right? The more dangerous society gets, and just a sense of discomfort, being ill at ease with people who are very different from you hurts. Right? People overwhelmingly want to spend time with people like themselves. We've made society more diverse, so we've made society more painful to participate in, and people increasingly withdraw from society and throw up big, locked doors and safe communities to try to avoid society. So our free time is dominated by consumption. Well, people who are close with their families, I don't think their free time is dominated by consumption. So you may have a lawyer who balances a 70-hour work week with sips of expensive scotch. It's also relevant to low-wage hourly workers. If you never have enough time to really relax, why not agree to your boss's request to pick up an extra shift? Yeah, all things being equal, I'd rather make money. So our free time is both vanishing and worsening. And so this academic says that this spiral started with the transformation of consumer capitalism after the end of the Second World War. Working hours stopped declining in the US. After a drop in the early 20th century, consumer capitalism became fast. We would use transportation and communication technologies, along with marketing known as planned obsolescence, to speed up the pace of consumption. Consumer capitalism funneled new products, allowing us to interface with the world without social mediation. Yeah, at the same time, we became increasingly diverse, which meant we had less in common with a society. And so we were more incentivized to interface with the world without social mediation. The automobile lets you travel without needing to take a train or walk in a crowd. One reason the left hates automobiles, because it gives you freedom of who you want to hang out with. The phonograph allows you to hear music without needing to go to a concert hall. So we had these quantum leaps in consumer goods with the TV, the internet, and smartphones, and they resulted in the colonization of our free time by fast-paced and antisocial modes of consumption. Well, people are strongly incentivized to be antisocial by many of the unfortunate criminal developments in the wider society and increasing diversity, which gives us less reason to participate in society because we just don't feel comfortable with people who are incredibly different from us and don't share our hero system or our loyalties and are not closely genetically related to us. The more genetically related we are to people, the more at ease we will feel and the more likely we will be to sacrifice for them. So the 8-hour day became standard right around the 1930s. After World War II, workers were never so strong and organized. You had very strong union movements, but workers applied their strength to ensuring access to the fruits of the consumer economy. It was the best option at the time. So idea of much shorter work weeks fell to the margins. So the taming of the labor movement led to the deterioration of not only our free time, but also our working lives, the entrenchment of private government, and to the deprivation that has driven us to the dead-end dream of self-employment. So according to this New Yorker article, the degraded quality of our leisure and labor have the same root cause. So we should fight for improvements in both domains. I say the traditional perspective on life, that we're not primarily individuals, but members of extended families, will sort this out for us.
And so the duty to God becomes a right to meaningful and respected work. Bullshit jobs don't count. The only jobs that count as fulfilling your duty to a calling is jobs that actually...
Have you experienced what it's like to go to work with people like you? All right, so Brent says, let's bring back workplaces that are patriarchal, hierarchical, yet fair and generous to subordinates who earn it, and homogeneous, meaning that people around others like themselves, and free trade practices that screw industrial workers. Unions were good for industrial and mining jobs, but they are largely obsolete now, and they incentivize workers to be lazy and brazenly entitled. And can't stand hearing Marxist talking points from employees at the office. It just sounds like whiny Nietzschean slave morality, in my opinion. Another friend said, we need to talk about quantity versus quality. Satisfying work should involve intellectual and a manual component. Today's computer work is head dominant, gives little satisfaction to the hands. I don't agree. I think you can be very satisfied with a purely intellectual component to your work, and you can engage in some manual component in your own time. Mental versus physical. Most modern work is mental and sedentary. Sedentary work saps the body and then the mind of health. Not if you do it in a wise way, right? If you don't just sit in a chair for 8 hours, if you take good care of yourself. The modern office is an unhealthy petri dish of disease recirculating through air conditioning. The social environment is toxic and riddled with gossip and power games. And then there is HR. Those are some reactions I got from friends.
Promote human welfare. And that work has to be respected because, and they're quite explicit about this, every worker, even the most menial, is doing God's work and following God's duty. Everyone, whatever their specialization, has dignity in the fact that they are fulfilling the duty that God has assigned them. And consequently, what we see here is the seeds of a pro-worker work ethic, the side of the work ethic that I think Weber neglected, although it is there in the texts. We have then the elements of a pro-worker work ethic, namely an insistence on the dignity of all workers, even the most menial. That every calling must consist in meaningful work, or as Baxter put it, honest labors profitable to the Commonwealth. These citations, CD stands for the Christian Directory, Baxter's magnificent 5-volume comprehensive guide to Christian ethics.
Okay, that kind of dignity and egalitarian approach is not going to come primarily from work. That comes naturally from a tribal or national identity. Right? There's an inherent egalitarianism to a nationalist perspective. Right? If you believe that you're part of the same extended family, you will be much more likely to treat other people with dignity. So all the things that this woman and lefties who believe in maximum human flourishing and self-authentication from work, right? People are much more likely to find these things from a national, religious, tribal commitment.
I was working from an edition that was printed deep into the 19th century, and talking to Presbyterian ministers in America, I find, oh, they love Baxter. They know Baxter. He's still read today and highly influential. Baxter also argued that workers were entitled.
I mean, does the good life exist primarily outside of work? Yeah, it does for 95% of people. Right? For very few people is the good life primarily found at work. It's just an absurd left-wing idea. I mean, I made a living as a writer for over a decade. Yeah, that was the good life. It felt incredibly freeing and exciting, but not many people can make a living as a writer. People would be much more incentivized to put effort into developing a good social life if we had less crime and more freedom of association and fewer civil rights laws. Right? I'm thinking about my friends who will never hire from certain groups. They just don't want to deal with the litigation that comes if you have to fire a member of certain groups. Right? If we restored the ability to discriminate, we took away civil rights laws, we returned the traditional understanding of the U.S. Constitution, we returned freedom of association, allow employers to hire who they want to, right? You'd have more homogeneous workplaces, which would be far more pleasant. Right? It's incredibly taxing to interact with people very different from you in a workplace compared to the sense of comfort when you all share the same hero system, when you're genetically related, when you have a similar national or tribal identity. I mean, people make their lives much smaller and less social in multicultural settings. And this is a good way to use spare time, right? Think about the great moral, philosophical, and political issues, right? We're not just frittering away our time talking about how Netflix produces so much crap, right? Hundreds of years from now, people are going to look back on these live streams as representing a profound step forward in moral thinking. Did you guys see the Netflix roast of Tom Brady? That was brutal. I mean, that was brutally funny. That was amazing, man. I mean, that was as good as having a penis that was a weapon of destruction with your lawfully wedded spouse who likes it. All right, young men with free time and few obligations wreak havoc. Right, so there are plenty of people you don't want to have more freedom. Right, many people can't handle freedom. You think you want freedom? You can't handle the freedom. I think we need to apply vouch nationalism to work. Imagine if you take a job and you have 20 or 10 adults who vouch for you that you're not going to steal at the job, or 10 adults who vouch for you that you're going to be a hard worker. Right? That would make hiring so much more efficient. If you're an employer, imagine what a joy it would be to only hire people who have at least 10 vouchers from law-abiding adults. So many privileges we can extend effectively and efficiently and productively and create human flourishing if we implement a system of vouchers. You should have to have at least 10 law-abiding adults with a clean criminal record who vouch that you're going to be a responsible driver, you'd be a responsible gun owner, that Los Angeles or Beverly Hills or Manhattan won't be diminished by your presence.
Entitled to relief from employer abuses. Among his guides he tells employers that they must not rule their servants tyrannically, and that workers must be provided safe and healthful conditions. He also argues that all workers are entitled to fair and living wages, and they have a right to charity. Anyone in desperate need is entitled to charity. And finally, he argued that the ultimate reward of labor was the saints' everlasting rest. It is true, it's nose to the grindstone in this world.
Look, does it bother me that Steve Saylor is hosted at uns.com, considering that most of the content on uns I find repellent? Not terribly. I recognize that Steve Saylor doesn't have a lot of options, and that's just the nature of reality. The New York Times and the Washington Post went beating down his door. Any thoughts on the Bank of America men who were worked to death? B of A men? I am completely unaware of this story. Always easy to, yeah. Guys, you have a choice. Vouch nationalism or Vouch nationalism. Vouch meaning the left-wing streamer who's into pornography. Always easy to self-righteously condemn and to delude oneself about one's own virtue and principle from the distance from temptation and the opportunities to succumb, which is what Reverend Billy Graham said about Bill Clinton. Don't judge him until you have had his opportunities.
But the reward of that is you go to heaven, and that is an eternal vacation with God. What could be more awesome than that? Furthermore, Baxter was very strict about the work ethic. It imposes stern duties on the rich as well as the poor. The rich, too, have an obligation to engage in productive labor. God hath strictly commanded it to all. Baxter liked to quote or cite.
Large part of the reason that many people have trouble at work and at school, about 5% of the population, they have undiagnosed and untreated ADHD.
Adam's curse. When God expelled Adam and Eve from paradise, he commanded that Adam work by the sweat of his brow to the end of his.
So Steve Saylor often talks about in the 1960s being controversial was thought a good thing, but nowadays it's not. It really isn't. So the positive side of me being an independent person who was fired from many jobs over the course of his life is that I can produce something that's different, that I'm not just some ideological drone to one particular commitment. So we all have traits that have both positive expression and negative expression, right? It seems to me most people who live stream don't contribute much that's positive and create much that's negative, both for themselves and for other people. But it is a medium that is capable of human improvement.
Days. And that is commanded to every last person, including those idle landlords in England.
So men often have a much more romantic perspective on life, on romance, on relationships, on work. Romantic meaning seeing more there than is really there. So I think a far higher percentage of men get their meaning and purpose in life from work compared to women. Women overwhelmingly have a much more pragmatic and realistic attitude towards relationships and towards work.
I think even more importantly for the present day is that he opposed activity that just consists in extracting wealth from other people.
So I still, even with my ADHD medication, I still have some narcissistic tendencies. Someone just gave me a slight compliment the other day, said that I had a nice name. And I just went on and on. Oh, that's so nice to hear. Thank you very much. I'm from Australia. Not many people named Luke in Australia. So someone just gives me like a one-sentence compliment, and I just like seize on it and go on and on and on. So ADHD medication is not going to cure everything. I think part of what it means to be a man is that you have to conquer, right? Men are driven to conquer the outside world, and most of us primarily do this through earning and providing and protecting. The best advice I think I ever got from a psychiatrist was back in the end of 1993 after he got me on Nardil and I made a partial recovery from chronic fatigue syndrome. Dr. Daniel Goldwyn, psychiatrist in Orlando, Florida, encouraged me, go out there and show me how much money you can make. And I didn't follow that advice, but I've never forgotten it. People who have the discipline of camaraderie, community, family, extended family, and at least a normal level of human connections will generally be able to handle freedom, and people who don't have those things will generally go downhill with freedom.
He called this a prison and constant calamity, to be tied to spend one's life in doing little good at all to others, though he should grow rich by it himself. So Baxter has some chapters in his Christian directory, which basically amount to a guide to Christian business ethics, in which he condemns a variety of business models, which amount to mere wealth extraction, what he calls a spiritual calamity, to be engaged in these kinds of businesses. All kinds of unfair and exploitative business models, which he defines as oppression. That's a quote from him. He says, do not tread on your brethren as stepping stones of your own advancement. That seems to have application today. Do not injure your inferiors who are unable to resist. Don't exploit the vulnerable. He railed against monopolists, usurers, hucksters, and grocers. And grocers are people who try to corner the market in some commodity and make profits that way. He also argued against unfair evictions and unfair raising of rents beyond what was customary. I think that also has contemporary application. And also, here's a Lockean version of this. Locke, I think, also, I have a reading of Locke as totally a work ethic guy. And Locke argues against price discrimination against the poor and desperate. Just because you can extract a higher price from a poor and desperate person for some good doesn't mean you're entitled to get it. Even
have you guys even read John Locke?
though you could get it on the market, you should be willing to sell that good at whatever price you would sell it, to be willing to sell it for somebody who isn't desperate for it. Another duty of the rich is effective altruism. And Peter Singer has, of course, famously articulated that same doctrine, but it originates in Baxter. And I want to show you that it's possible to derive the duty of effective altruism without taking utilitarianism as a first premise. It goes back to
Have you guys heard of FIRE? A big article about it in the New York Times. Financial Independence Retire Early Movement. Right, FIRE got its start in the early 2000s with a mantra of extreme saving. Right, you might have heard about stoic, ultra-minimalist living off beans and friends' couches. Right, now it comes to include all the people who would like to exit the workforce on their own terms at an age of their own choosing, rather than hustling for a paycheck all the way into their 60s and 70s and 80s. So many FIRE aspirants still get to early retirement by the traditional route of simply saving madly. Others truffle hunt for high-paying W-2s, tax loopholes, bold and risky market bets, or big entrepreneurial ploys. What is the overarching credo of FIRE? In today's unpredictable financial landscape, 9-to-5s and decades-long careers have become bad investments, right? I think this is a much wiser perspective on work. So old-school benefits like pensions and job security are a thing of the past. Wages aren't keeping up with inflation. So after decades of tolerating workaholic culture as the norm, employees are tired, unafraid to show it, and yearning to yank back control of their lives. So for fed-up workers willing to do a bit of math, FIRE offers a straightforward antidote. You can just leave it all behind. So the author says long before side hustle became a Merriam-Webster lingo, I was working Costco snack arbitrage on the elementary school playground. I did that. I would buy drinks at $1 and sell them to my classmates for $2. In adulthood, I moved on to online surveys, research studies, plasma donation, vintage retail, parts modeling, and dog sitting in lieu of paying rent. I've left no income source unturned. I've trawled every page of NerdWallet and the Points Guy. I've made questionable margin calls. I've woken up at the crack of dawn to day trade. I have flipped and I have churned. So more than 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. The average American is in 5 to 6 figure debt, and he has a cursory knowledge of how he got there. So understanding finance will feel like a secret weapon. The original FIRE doctrine revolved around delay of gratification, or the good life always revolves around delay of gratification. Save your money, ideally as much as 50 to 75% of each paycheck instead of spending it immediately. When you've amassed enough of a nest egg, quit your job, take the rest of your life for yourself. Right? It's a simple philosophy, as the main principles fit on a post-it note. It's not easy, because everything the typical middle-class consumer has been raised and trained to believe goes against these principles. People have grown up associating success with money and spending money with happiness. They've been trained to sit still and perform repetitive work, first by a teacher, then by a manager. They've been educated to be specialists in a narrow field and to never think outside the box. So here are the seminal books in this movement. 2010 book, Early Retirement Extreme, written when the author lived out of an RV on $7,000 a year. This is one seminal text for early retirees. Two others are Your Money or Your Life, 1992 Personal Finance Bible, and the blog Mr. Money Mustache. Started in 2011 by Peter Adeny, retired from his software engineering job in 2005 at age 30 and figured out how to shrink his family expenses down to just $24,000 a year. So the Tao of all three tomes is that minimalist spending and anti-consumption offer the keys to better living. It's true. This is good stuff. Make yourself rich so you can retire early. So conventional adherents of this perspective are not necessarily big earners or genius mathematicians with incredible impulse control. Their superpower is their expert planning. It's the ability to see the finish line from miles away that has allowed even some minimum wage workers to achieve early retirement. One simple FIRE rule of thumb is to first calculate your target FI number, multiply anticipated annual retirement expenses by 25, and squirrel away as much as possible into interest accruing or tax advantage buckets like 401ks, low index funds, certificates of deposit, HSAs, and Roth IRAs until you hit that number. Then there are many offshoots of this movement, some more brazen than others. Not many people want to get to early retirement by living off beans. So you have lean FIRE, right? These are the people with the stringent penny pinching. Then you have coast FIRE, more measured approach, means front-loading your retirement savings and coasting on compound interest and working lightly until you're ready to quit. Or barista FIRE, quitting your main job but buttressing your retirement with a side gig. Or fat FIRE, a luxurious, no-sacrifice approach to retirement, the polar opposite of lean FIRE. So you may think these early retirees are layabouts just soaking up the sunshine while everyone else toils, but why not see them as brave maniacs daring to build an entirely new vision for the world? Retirement has long been framed as a reward for a job well done. Well, maybe we should be in it for ourselves and do the job effectively and do it when we're young.
That contradiction in the original commandments of the work ethic. So it goes like this. You have a duty to maximize your income. But you also have a duty not to waste anything that you acquire. But you are forbidden from spending that massive accumulation of wealth on yourself, because that would be indulging in vain luxury and covetousness. But you got to spend your money, so what are you going to spend it on? You have nothing else to spend it on but your needy brethren, right? And also public works, he allowed, so pay your taxes, right? Because public works will arise from that, and that's helpful to the community. I wrote to Peter, and when I discovered these passages in Baxter, and I wrote to Peter an email, and I said, Peter, are you aware that you are simply channeling the thoughts of a 17th century Puritan minister? And he was delighted to learn that. Anyway, here's like a perfect encapsulation. This is Baxter now, but it's incredible, the parallel with Singer. He says, the portions or comeliest clothing of your children must rather be neglected than the poor be suffered to perish. It's pretty much an abstract of Singer's famous article on famine and affluence. It's right there. Okay, so this gives us the progressive path to secularization. And again, we have the theological version on the left-hand column, and then this version of the work ethic also gets secularized, and we have the secular parallel.
Okay, here's the Bank of America story that we mentioned earlier. According to Twitter, amazing this hasn't hit the media yet. Bank of America associate was worked to death this week. Did someone have a gun to his head? He chose to work to death. A veteran with a young family dying after being worked 120 hours a week. It wasn't that he was worked. He chose to do this to make some crusty rich guy's money. He chose to do this because it was the best of his options. So this is on him. This isn't on Bank of America. So I'm not a big fan of the victimhood mindset. On said deal, he was made to work 120 hours a week for 4 weeks straight. Yeah, did someone have a gun to his head? Right, he took this job and stayed in this job because in his mind, it was the best of his options, right? It's up to you to stop people from abusing you. If you're unable to stand up for yourself, you can't expect other people to stand up for you. No one's coming. No one's coming to rescue you. No one's going to rescue you from your own willingness to accept abuse. I have often put up with abusive bosses, but as I've gotten older and wiser, I noticed that my more successful, productive friends would not put up with the kind of abuse that I put up with for years. They would not put up with it for 30 seconds. They would walk out. So if you're unwilling to stand up for yourself, right, I don't blame Bank of America.
On the right. So theologically, workers are honored as following a sacred calling that God has called them to. In secular terms, that amounts to the demand that all workers are entitled to dignity and meaningful work. No bullshit jobs. Both sides believe in free.
Dignity has to come from within. If you're willing to put up with abuse, right, dignity is not going to be bestowed upon you by government regulation or by, particularly, indulgent boss. How does working to death relate to under-earning? Well, it's under-earning working yourself to death because you're not going to be around to enjoy yourself. It's like how does the urge to rescue relate to the urge to be rescued, right? The flip sides of the same coin, right? If you do something so extreme that you do yourself permanent damage, right, that is an incredibly maladaptive, self-destructive choice. My father would talk to me about people who, when they were young, they would spend their health to get their wealth. And then once they had wealth, they found they would need to spend their wealth to try to get back their health. And that doesn't work well. What's your favorite mindset? Guerrilla mindset, Bronze Age mindset? Neither mindset. I like the Puritan mindset as a non-Puritan, non-Christian. So the Puritans came from the highest IQ portion of Britain. I believe it's still the highest IQ part of Britain. And they came to Massachusetts, which is still the highest IQ state in the United States. So working yourself to death or underworking are both reflections of a maladaptive approach to reality, a lack of self-respect. You must not be at ease with yourself if you are unable to stand up to demands that are incredibly strongly aligned against your best interests. Wokeness is the final stage of the Protestant Reformation. Yeah, modern liberal leftism is a development upon the Protestant approach to life. So the Catholic and Jewish approach to life is incredibly physical, right? There are sacred objects, sacred spaces, there's sacred time, and Protestantism came along and etherealized everything, and then wokeness is an etherealization on top of that.
Free occupational choice?
It's like how many women are attracted to and deliberately connect themselves to men who beat them, right? How many men deliberately connect themselves with and stay committed to bosses who abuse them, right? There is a masochistic, self-destructive, maladaptive tendency in the human being that welcomes abuse because if you're not at ease with yourself, you feel like you deserve abuse. So plenty of women are attracted to men who abuse them because they feel like these men see them for who they really are. Plenty of men are attracted to bosses who abuse them and work situations that abuse them because they feel that these abusive situations, recognize them for who they are. Like when you're called by your true name, you recognize it. And if you have developed the mindset that your true name is, piece of feces, right, you are going to resonate to opportunities that make you feel like a piece of feces.
Do you have a right to that? Theologically, workers are entitled to a frugal living wage. In the mid-17th century, you don't yet have the concept of ever expanding economic growth. It's not really there. But once we get that concept in play, we get, for instance, Adam Smith's call that workers are entitled to high and rising wages. Theologically, there is both a right and a duty to charity if one is destitute. And that becomes, in the secular version, a right to social insurance, rather more dignified because then you don't have to beg for a particular other and accept some kind of submission to another person's will. Theologically,
Okay, that's enough for me. I got to do some pull-ups, some push-ups, some weights, have some